Isabel moved quietly through the lobby of Langford Holdings, her cleaning cart barely making a sound. She had worked there for 2 years, always early, always invisible. Most employees didn't look her in the eye, and she never expected them to. But Isabel didn't mind the silence. It felt familiar. She was born deaf and had long learned how to read people's expressions more than their words. Every morning, she signed good morning to herself, just as a habit. But on one ordinary day, she signed it as the CEO passed and he turned. Alexander Langford stopped walking and looked directly at her for the first time. He didn't understand what she had signed, but her hands had moved with intention and grace. She froze when he looked at her, thinking she had crossed some invisible line. But instead of ignoring her, Alexander smiled softly. He tilted his head and asked, "Was that sign language?" Isabel nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. He didn't say anything else, just nodded in return and walked to the elevator. It was only a moment, but everything felt different after that. For the first time, someone important had actually seen her. Later that day, Isabel was called into the HR office. She feared the worst. Maybe her simple gesture had offended someone. But the woman behind the desk smiled kindly and handed her an envelope. Inside was a note from the CEO. "You caught my attention. Meet me tomorrow morning, 10th floor. I'd like to talk." Isabel read it 3 times, unsure if it was real. She hadn't even spoken to him, and now he wanted to speak to her. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She couldn't help but wonder what exactly he saw when he looked at her. The next morning, Isabel dressed with extra care. She didn't have fancy clothes, but she wore the cleanest blouse she owned. Her hands trembled as she pressed the elevator button to the 10th floor. It was the executive level. She had never been there before. When the doors opened, Alexander Langford himself was waiting. He greeted her with a smile and motioned for her to enter his office. Inside, he signed slowly, "Good morning." Surprising her completely, Isabel smiled. Wide. It was the first time someone had tried to speak her language. Alexander admitted he didn't know sign language well, but he wanted to learn. He had started practicing the night before, after searching online. He asked Isabel if she'd be willing to teach him during her breaks. She hesitated at first, unsure of his intentions, but agreed. They started meeting in his office during short morning sessions. She would show him basic signs, and he would try them, often awkwardly. He laughed at himself when he got things wrong, making her feel at ease. Little by little, a connection began to grow. People began to notice Isabel more in the building. Some gave her strange looks, others whispered when she passed. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the moments she shared with Alexander. He always made time for her, even when his schedule was full. Their lessons became conversations, not just with hands, but with glances and smiles. Isabel found herself looking forward to every morning. She began signing good morning to him with confidence, and each time, he replied with more accuracy and care. One afternoon, Alexander brought her tea and sat across from her. He told her he admired her strength and the calm way she carried herself. She signed, "People only notice me when they need something cleaned." He shook his head and replied, "Not anymore. I notice you." His words stayed with her long after she left his office. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. She went home that night thinking about his eyes and the way he listened, and how, with no words, they were slowly learning to understand each other. The next day, Isabel found a small gift on her cleaning cart. It was a book on sign language with a note inside. "For our journey." Her heart swelled as she carefully opened the first page. He was serious about this, not just polite. That afternoon, their lesson lasted longer than usual. He asked her to teach him how to say "you're important." She did, slowly, guiding his hands with her own. When he signed it back to her, she had to look away to hide the tears. Rumors began to swirl around the office. Some said the maid was using him to climb ranks. Others believed it was just a strange CEO phase. Isabel heard them, but Alexander never treated her differently. He began walking with her in the lobby, sometimes unbothered by the stares. When someone asked if she was just the cleaner, he responded, "She's also my teacher." That answer stunned everyone, including Isabel. He never once seemed ashamed of knowing her. One morning, she didn't come to their lesson. Alexander waited, worried, checking the schedule. He found her downstairs, cleaning a spill near the entrance. He walked up, bent down beside her, and signed, "Everything okay?" She nodded, then paused before signing. "Do you mean it? All of this?" He looked her in the eyes and replied, "Yes, every word, every sign." Then he gently took her hand, stood her up, and led her to the private elevator. That was the day the whole building watched, as the CEO took the maid upstairs not to hide her, but to begin something honest. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Isabel held her breath. It was quiet, elegant, and nothing like the world she usually cleaned. Alexander led her into his office, not as a boss but as someone who respected her. He offered her tea again and asked if she would stay longer today. She nodded, unsure. If her heart was racing from nerves or something deeper, they sat close, their conversation slow, shared with gestures and expressions. He didn't rush her, didn't interrupt, he just listened. And for Isabel, that kind of listening felt louder than any words ever spoken. That evening, Alexander stayed late, staring out the window with his tie undone. He wasn't thinking about reports or meetings, but about a woman who said so much. Without saying anything, he remembered how her fingers moved with confidence and care, and how her silence never felt empty. His assistant knocked gently, asking if everything was all right. He smiled and answered softly, "Yes, just thinking." Downstairs, Isabel finished her shift with a new sense of courage. She wasn't sure what the next day would bring, but she felt it in her chest. Things were changing, and for once, she wasn't afraid of it. The next morning, Isabel arrived early, only to find a note on her cart. "Come upstairs when you're ready. I cleared the first hour for you." She smiled, touched by how he always made space for her. As she stepped off the elevator, the receptionist gave her a curious look, but said nothing. Alexander greeted her with a warm smile. "Already signing. You look happy today." She signed back. "You give me reasons to be." They spent the hour practicing, laughing when his fingers stumbled. But neither of them noticed the time, only each other. People were beginning to talk more boldly. Some accused Isabel of seeking attention or special favors. Others whispered that Alexander had changed since she appeared. He didn't respond to the gossip, nor did he stop seeing her. Instead, he asked her to teach a sign language class for executives, offering her payment and respect. Isabel hesitated, unsure if she belonged in front of people like them. He looked her in the eye and signed, "You're more capable than they know." So she said yes, not for them, but for herself. The first class was awkward at first. Some employees refused to look her in the eye. Others rolled their eyes or treated it like a joke. But Alexander sat in the front, learning every sign alongside them. He made mistakes, smiled, and praised Isabel with every lesson. Gradually, the staff softened, seeing her not as a maid, but as someone with value. And Isabel, though nervous, stood taller with every session. She had never imagined herself teaching, but now she couldn't imagine stopping. On a rainy afternoon, Alexander asked if she wanted to see something. He led her to a quiet room where old paintings lined the walls. "My mother used to paint," he explained. "I come here when I need to think." Isabel looked around, her fingers tracing the air as if reaching for the past. She signed, "It's peaceful here, like you." He smiled, then gently reached out and took her hand. They didn't say anything more, but their silence was full of meaning. It was the first time he touched her without asking, and the first time she didn't pull away. That evening, Isabel couldn't stop replaying the moment in her head. His hand had been warm, steady, and full of something she didn't yet have words for. She had promised herself never to fall for anyone who could walk away so easily. But Alexander wasn't walking away. He kept showing up, again and again. She sat at her small kitchen table, writing a list of signs she wanted to teach him. Each one was more personal than the last. Trust, safe, stay. When she saw him the next day, she showed him the list. And he learned every word without hesitation. The lessons became more than language, they became a lifeline. He would ask how she was feeling, and she would sign it instead of saying it. Sometimes, they just sat quietly, their eyes doing all the talking. He brought her books about deaf culture, and she shared childhood memories he didn't expect. When she laughed, he watched like it was something rare and beautiful. She started smiling more at work, even when others stared. He started defending her openly, correcting anyone who made dismissive comments. They weren't hiding, but they weren't rushing either. Alexander's board of directors eventually confronted him. They questioned his priorities, asking if his relationship with a maid was appropriate. He stood calmly, folded his hands, and replied, "She has more integrity than half the people in this room." They threatened press leaks and image damage. He didn't flinch. He simply stood by the window and said, "Let them talk." Isabel heard about it later through Clara, the assistant, who had always been kind. She asked Isabel, "Are you sure you're ready for this much attention?" Isabel nodded. She was no longer hiding. On Friday morning, Isabel walked through the lobby without looking down. She held her head high, her ID badge clipped beside a silver pin that said instructor. Some staff smiled, others stayed silent, but no one ignored her anymore. She made her way to the executive floor, her hands already prepared to teach. Alexander met her at the door, signing, "You're amazing." She laughed and signed back, "I had a good teacher too." Their fingers touched briefly as she passed, warm and certain, and deep inside, they both knew this was no longer just a story about a maid. Isabel's classes began to grow in popularity, with more employees attending each week. People began seeing her not just as a maid, but as a teacher, a mentor, a person of strength. She had earned their respect not by raising her voice but by staying true to herself. Alexander continued to sit in the front, learning every sign with focus and care. He told her once, "I've spoken to thousands of people, but I've never learned to listen like this." That made her eyes well up with tears, though she didn't let them fall. The space between them had grown smaller, warmer, more meaningful, and slowly, she realized she wasn't falling alone. One evening after class, Alexander asked her to stay a little longer. He brought out 2 mugs of tea and a small notebook filled with hand-drawn signs. "I've been practicing on my own," he said, handing her the book. She flipped through the pages, touched by the effort and care. Each page was filled with her favorite words: peace, brave, freedom, love. She looked up and signed, "Why are you doing all this?" He hesitated for a moment, then signed back, "Because you matter to me." Her heart beat faster than it had in years. Rumors reached the press, and headlines began to circulate online. The CEO and the Maid romance or scandal. One article read in bold. Isabel saw her face on a news blog and felt sick to her stomach. Alexander called her immediately, asking if she was okay. She said nothing, just sat on her bed with the phone against her chest. Later that night, he showed up at her apartment building, coat soaked from the rain. He didn't ask to come up, just stood under her window and signed, "I'm still here." And that was enough to help her sleep. The next day, Alexander released a statement to the press. He didn't deny the relationship, he defended it. "She is intelligent, kind, and dignified. And yes, I care for her deeply," he said. Some investors panicked, but the public responded with surprising support. People shared her story online, admiring her strength and quiet courage. Others in the deaf community called her a role model, thanking her for representing them. Isabel wasn't seeking fame, but the attention gave her a new kind of voice. And with it, she chose to speak. She agreed to a single interview with a respected journalist. It was filmed in sign language, with a soft-spoken interpreter beside her. Isabel spoke about her job, her passion for teaching, and what it meant to be noticed. She didn't mention Alexander by name, but her eyes softened when he came up. The interviewer asked, "What changed your life the most?" She smiled and signed. Someone listened. That was enough. The video went viral in less than a day, and suddenly, she became more than a maid, she became a voice. Alexander invited her to speak at a company event. Something she had never imagined doing. He told her, "You don't have to impress them. Just be you, that's already more than enough." She walked onto the stage in a simple dress, hands shaking but eyes strong. When she started signing her story, the room fell completely silent. No one checked their phones, no one whispered, no one blinked. Every hand movement held emotion, every pause carried weight. And when she finished, they stood and clapped, not out of formality, but out of genuine respect. Backstage, Alexander was waiting with a proud smile. She ran to him and signed, "I didn't think I could do it." He gently cupped her hands and replied, "You just changed the room." They stood there, forehead to forehead, not caring who walked by. From that moment on, nothing between them was hidden anymore. They walked together through the halls, side by side, hand in hand. People still talked, but now, they talked with admiration. And Isabel, once invisible, now walked with her head held high. One evening, Alexander invited her to dinner at his penthouse. It was the first time she'd seen his world outside the office. Everything was elegant and quiet, just like him. He had learned to cook a simple pasta dish, just for her. They laughed when he dropped a spoon, and she teased him with signs. After dinner, they stood on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small ring, no proposal, just a symbol. He signed, "You belong, Isabel, with me, always." She didn't need time to answer. Her fingers trembled slightly as she signed. "Then let's keep walking forward." He kissed her hand, slow and gentle, and she closed her eyes. The night sky above them seemed to hum with quiet joy. She no longer felt like a background character in someone else's world. Now, she was part of the story, loved, valued, and seen. They stood there until the wind turned cold, hearts still warm. And together, they stepped inside, ready for whatever came next. Months passed, and Isabel's role at the company changed permanently. She now led workshops, mentored new staff, and created inclusion programs with Alexander's full support. People sought her advice, not because of who she dated, but because of who she was. Her story was used in company training, not as a romance but as a lesson in human connection. Alexander remained at her side, still learning, still listening, and every morning, no matter how busy, they greeted each other in sign, "Good morning, I see you," because their love had never been loud, but it had always been true. And it all began with one silent greeting. That changed everything. After months of growing closer, Isabel felt more confident than ever. She was no longer just the maid. She had become a respected part of the company's culture. Alexander continued learning sign language, surprising everyone with his dedication. Their bond deepened in small moments, shared lunches, quiet smiles, and silent support. She realized that what had started as a simple greeting had blossomed into something much more. The board was slowly accepting their connection, though some still whispered behind closed doors. Isabel refused to let gossip define her, or their relationship. Together, they faced the world with quiet strength and mutual respect. One day, Isabel received an invitation to speak at an international conference. She was nervous, but excited to represent the deaf community and share her story. Alexander helped her prepare, practicing her signing and encouraging her every step. When the day arrived, she stood confidently before a packed audience. Her story touched hearts and opened minds about inclusion and respect. The applause was overwhelming, but more meaningful was the sense of belonging. Backstage, Alexander embraced her warmly, proud beyond words. Isabel knew this was just the beginning of her journey. At the office, changes were happening quickly. The company launched new accessibility programs inspired by Isabel's work. She was promoted to head of diversity and inclusion initiatives, Her colleagues no longer saw her as the maid, but as a leader. Alexander watched her succeed with quiet admiration and unwavering support. They celebrated each milestone, knowing how far they had come together, but Isabel still treasured their private moments. Away from the spotlight, those were the times she felt most herself and most loved. One evening, Alexander surprised Isabel with a private dinner at a cozy restaurant. They talked about their future, their dreams, and the challenges they had overcome. Isabel sighed. "I never imagined this life, but I wouldn't change a thing." He smiled and replied, "Neither would I, you changed everything for me." Their hands intertwined, a silent promise stronger than any spoken vow. They talked late into the night, sharing hopes and fears without words. Isabel felt grateful for the journey they were on, one of trust, patience, and love. She realized that being noticed had given her a voice she never knew she had. Back at work, Isabel noticed a new employee struggling with hearing loss. She immediately reached out, offering support and friendship. Alexander encouraged her to create a mentorship program for employees with disabilities. The program quickly became one of the company's most valued initiatives. Isabel's role evolved from teacher to advocate and leader. She found fulfillment in helping others find their voices. Alexander continued to stand beside her, learning and growing together. Their partnership was now a symbol of hope and change for many. Despite their happiness, challenges still arose. Some board members pushed back against the changes Isabel represented. They questioned her qualifications and tried to undermine her efforts. Alexander defended her fiercely, refusing to let old biases win. He reminded the board that progress required courage and open hearts. Isabel stayed focused, letting her work and kindness speak louder than any criticism. Together, they weathered the storm stronger and more united than before. Their love was no longer a secret, but a source of inspiration. Isabel and Alexander began planning a community center for deaf education. They dreamed of a place where children and adults could learn and grow without barriers. Fundraising was challenging, but their shared passion drew many supporters. Isabel's story inspired donations from all over the world. The project became a beacon of hope for the local community. Alexander saw in her the strength and vision he had always admired. They worked tirelessly, balancing their busy lives with their shared mission. It was more than a dream, it was becoming reality. One quiet afternoon, Isabel found a letter waiting on her desk. It was from her estranged family, expressing regret and hope for reconciliation. She hesitated but decided to respond, longing for healing and peace. Alexander offered his support, reminding her she was never alone. They visited her hometown together, facing the past with courage. The reunion was emotional, filled with tears and understanding. Isabel felt a weight lift from her shoulders, and a new chapter begin. She knew her journey was far from over, but she was ready. Back in the city, life settled into a new rhythm. Isabel and Alexander balanced work, love, and their growing responsibilities. The community center was nearing completion, a testament to their hard work. They celebrated small victories and comforted each other during setbacks. Their relationship deepened, built on trust, respect, and shared dreams. Isabel found strength in her voice and pride in her identity. Alexander discovered joy in seeing the world through her eyes. Together, they had transformed silence into a powerful story of love. On a bright spring morning, Isabel stood before the completed community center. Children laughed and signed around her, their faces full of hope. Alexander stood by her side, proud and smiling. She looked at him and signed, "Thank you for seeing me." He replied with a gentle smile, "I always will." The crowd applauded, not just for the building, but for the journey behind it. Isabel had gone from invisible maid to a leader who changed many lives. And it all started with one simple silent greeting that changed everything.